Joshua.
Thank you all for being here.
Hunter. Oh, okay. Yes, good to see you again. Ben, you got your hands full. We've met before as well, I believe. Good to see you. What's happening? I'm Joshua. Is it Elena?
Yes, nice to meet you.
Oh, thanks. I'm not going to put it back on.
No, mine keeps falling. You're fine.
Okay.
All right. Clock's ticking, right?
Mm-hmm. Hunter, you have our first question.
How many minutes? Two.
We're doing 1:15 because that's the only way we got through each question last time.
Okay.
Perfect.
60 seconds. 75 seconds.
Yeah. What are your plans? Okay, so what do you feel about lowering the voting age? I know that's something that only the state government can do, but it has to start with the city government. So.
Lowering the voting age.
Yeah. To me, like 16 or somewhere around there.
That's a really good question, right? I mean, you can drive at 16, right? So, and should, in a lot of the decisions that we make, especially at a city level, impact our youth quite a bit, right? And I am one of the proponents of equity in general, right? And I think when we talk about equity, one of the major tenets, at least in my opinion, is allowing the directly impacted to speak for themselves. So I would be an advocate for better mechanisms for the youth to be included in our democracy. I imagine it'd probably be a federal policy that would have to be implemented to get us down to 16, but I'd be interested in exploring that as an option. Or if not lowering the voting age, some other ways to empower our youth to participate in our democracy. I'd be down for that.
Yeah, actually, there's places all over the United States that are starting to shift, especially around school boards, because so many kids are actually impacted by their school board, and so that's something that we have actually talked about on council. And the reason we started these conversations was around participatory budgeting, and we specifically made sure that anyone 13 and over would be able to vote in participatory budgeting. And we did that because it serves so many ways to get kids engaged, get them excited about their local government, and actually hear from them what they wanted to do with the money that's also theirs. And a lot of folks are maybe concerned that kids can't make good decisions, maybe they're not mature enough, whatnot. And I will say that the feedback that we got consistently from teachers across the city were how excited students were around getting to vote in participatory budgeting and really understand, really getting the connection of oh, this actually matters. This isn't I like kids voting, but this what I'm doing today has an impact that I might get to see. I have a 13-year-old daughter. She got to vote in participatory budgeting. The 12-year-old was kind of not happy that he did not get to vote. When she was seeing all the affordable housing signs kind of popping for the bond, she was like, oh, I get to vote in that too, right? Because in her head, she was thinking oh, it's like participatory budgeting. And she was actually really bummed. I was like, yeah, no, you got to be 18 for that. So absolutely believe, just from the little bit that I saw, sometimes kids are actually better judges than adults are. We get jaded and cynical and not necessarily do the right thing.
How do you think we could improve access to mental health resources for youth?
Oh, that's an excellent question. A lot of what we do as a city, unfortunately, doesn't really cover that. But one of the things that I know I believe in as just an individual voter is healthcare for all. I do not believe that we should have a private insurance system right now the way that we do, because it is a huge barrier. I know that I'm a former teacher. I have seen students struggle with mental health, and depending on what kind of health care their parents had or what kind of jobs their parents had, depended on the kind of access that most of those kids really had to mental health services. And it's unfair and it's unjust and it's not okay. I think continuing to partner with the county and figuring out what we can do as council members to advocate for the things that they need and to be good allies in that way as different governing board is super, super important. I think encouraging what we have seen in our police department, which is to think through training for them on how you interact with folks who may be having a mental health crisis is super important. Another thing that I know I'm really interested in is creating an entirely parallel system so that there's communities, including I think there's one in Portland, Oregon, that if you're in a certain type of crisis, when you call 911, it doesn't get routed to the police department. It gets routed to healthcare providers, mental health care providers. So if somebody's having a mental health crisis, it's not a police officer that's showing up.
Yeah, a part of my platform is specifically dedicated to mental health and substance abuse. One of the things that I am an advocate for is a joint city and county funded program that responds to crises of mental health or substance abuse, as Councilwoman mentioned, with someone that shows up that's not a police officer, someone who's trained in crisis response. I'm a big proponent of a community wellness plan that was presented by the Durham Beyond Policing Coalition. While I disagree with their statement that we had to either choose between policing and community safety task force, I think that we should do both. I think there's instances where we need to properly resource our law enforcement, but I don't think that we need to criminalize mental illness or substance abuse, and I think that we're doing that in our community right now. If someone doesn't have the funds to get substance abuse treatment, for instance, they have to go to jail in order to get that treatment through the STAR program, which is a county program. I'd like to see those programs exist outside of our jail so that we're not forcing people to be locked up for 30 days, because I don't believe that the criminal justice system is a place for people to get treatment. So I'm advocating for a city and county funded initiative specifically centered around mental health and substance abuse in our neighborhoods. Somebody ran off with the third question? Oh, no. Okay. Keem's got it. All right.
How could you increase schools funding or better use of schools funding to improve youth education?
How would you better improve school funding, I think it was, right? So unfortunately at the city level, the city has very little, the city doesn't fund the schools. Schools are funded through county government. But I think from a workforce development lens, meaning partnering with private industry and catalyzing programs in our school system, that's something I'm a big proponent of. So in my day job, I work at the Chamber of Commerce, which works largely in recruitment of companies to Durham. And a lot of companies that we work with are very interested in engaging with the school system in some capacity, and most of the time that engagement looks like financing some sort of program. So I'd like to see better engagement with our private sector. I'm on the Durham Public Schools Foundation Board along with Councilwoman Caballero, and one of the things that we are tasked with doing is taking private money and helping to funnel it into our school system, into innovative programs. I'd like to see us do more of that on a citywide level beyond just foundation work, and I think there's several use cases where that has worked really effectively. I think the private sector could be a great partner to our school system, and I'd advocate for that.
Thank you for the question. So, as Mr. Gunn said, we do not actually have direct oversight over our schools. Schools are actually really interesting. They're funded by your county commissioners. So there's a school board that oversees it. Then the budget gets approved by county commissioners. The state and the federal government also have a role to play in your funding for your schools. So there's different levels. I think locally, one of the things that I know I do is I sit on the Durham Public Schools Foundation, and we constantly champion our public schools. So we're actually asked as city officials to come talk to students, to go talk to parents, to really encourage people within Durham to support Durham Public Schools. I think the other thing that we can do as city council members is to push on our state legislators. So we have our state delegation, and so we have asks of them, what do we need them to push at the state level, and so that's another way we can, we have pretty good relationships with all of our state delegation, and so to continue, because historically, so North Carolina, a long time ago, especially in the South, had the best public schools in the South. Had the best public school, public university system in the South. It was kind of like the pride and joy of North Carolina. And since I think 2000, since during the recession to now, what we've been giving our schools is lower and lower at the state level. And so what it does is it forces local communities to put more up front, and we're seeing how overall our public schools are, the quality has eroded in some cases because we haven't funded them at the level that we need to at the state.
Thank you. Hunter, you have the next question.
Okay, so what are you planning to do about affordable housing?
I plan on voting for the housing bond, and I hope that all of you also encourage the adults in your world who are 18 and over. Unfortunately, you all can't participate on that voting day. To pass the housing bond. I think it's our first step to doing the really important work around affordable housing. And the reason that it's so important is because it helps fund our 5-year housing strategy. And all of that information is online. I actually encourage all of you to go to the city website and read more about it. It was a plan that our community development department put together. And really thought through all the different ways that we could do affordable housing. So it's not just putting money in one kind of like bucket. So there's money for public housing, there's money to help low-income folks buy a home, there's money for what we call eviction diversion. So if you're living in an apartment or a house and you might be getting evicted, You may need legal representation, so now we give money to legal aid to help fund attorneys for that. It helps improve our programming around homelessness, creating a coordinated intake system between the city and the county for homeless individuals. What we realized when we looked kind of through our data was that we're doing okay with our homeless families and getting them services really quickly, but we're not doing such a great job, especially with our individual adult men. And so if we had a coordinated intake system, so kind of like a front door if you're homeless, getting access to services and especially housing.
Yeah, so affordability is a big concern for all of us in this community. I do support the affordable housing bond. I think it is a fair step forward, but I do have some concerns about its implementation, particularly as it relates to the history of this community and housing bonds and other bonds that have been passed here that have failed to do what they said they were going to do. Most notoriously is the 1960 Urban Renewal Bond that disproportionately impacted the black community here in Durham. And several promises were made to that community based on the fact that they would have home ownership opportunities, that their businesses would be rebuilt and relocated into nicer facilities. That never happened. The Durham County Library actually attributes that to issues with leadership and mismanagement, particularly leadership that was not in authentic relationship to the communities that they serve. So I'm advocating that we support the housing bond, but that we also elect leaders that are in authentic relationship to the communities that they serve to ensure, because to be clear, the City Council will appoint an oversight board. The City Council appoints the board at DHA. So the City Council has a lot of influence over how this bond will be implemented, and we need leadership that is in authentic relationship to the most directly impacted to ensure that it doesn't harm, as most of our bonds have done, harm the most vulnerable members of our community. So I support the bond. I think it can work. We just have to ensure that it's implemented properly. Thank you.
And then last question.
So, how do you plan to encourage people to use public transportation?
Yes.
So one of the things that I'm actually really, and this is kind of longer term, so it's not something that could happen easily, but one of the things I think that could potentially help people use mass transit is if the city just offered city buses, city transit, and only city transit for high school students, and stop using city buses for high school students, because it would automatically create, and it's free for students already. We've already passed that. And so it would create an entire generation of students who are just used to taking city buses, and so there's not even that kind of cultural shift to like, oh, how do I use it? What do I need to do? I don't really know. And there is a class division on who uses city buses. We all know that a lot of folks, grow up with maybe a little bit of a bias against using mass transit because, oh, it's for folks who don't have money. And so I think it would really help get over that kind of user bias to our mass transit. So that's one of my big ideas. I think that creating better busing in general is going to be really, really important. Improving our bike infrastructure is really, really important. Improving our sidewalk infrastructure is really important, because right now, they do a lot of analysis that more people would ride their bike if they weren't afraid they were going to get hit by a car. And so we have to create those infrastructure options, those mass transit options, so that we can get everyone out of their cars.
Okay.
Oh, you can vote even if you voted like over there. You can vote like in this event too. So.
My turn? So I think your question was, how do we encourage more people to use transit? When I think of transit, I like to think about where it goes, right? I like to think about access to transit for places like employers, right? I think more people would use transit if it went more places where they worked, places where they were more likely to convene. I agree with the school's point. So I think just improving our transit line in general and doing it sort of in reverse, rather than creating the transit lines, create them based on where people actually need to go, where most of our traffic happens, and ensure that there's an effective transit method there. But also making them better in terms of cleaner, safer, new innovative solutions such as bus rapid transit, which I think is the next step for us. And to be clear, when I first heard of bus rapid transit, I thought it was going to be really boring. I thought it was just faster buses or dedicated lanes. But it's actually sort of a hybrid between bus and rail, where the bus lines are on elevated platforms, and they're actually pretty cool. So I got a chance to go to Richmond and check out their bus rapid transit system, and I think it's really exciting. It's much more affordable for the community, much easier to implement, and I think more people will ride it if it goes to the places that they actually need to go. And as traffic continues to increase, I think that's another unfortunate incentive for using public transportation because traffic sucks, right? And I hate sitting in traffic, and 147 during freeway is a nightmare right now. So ensuring that our transit solution addresses that corridor, I think is very, very important. So I'd advocate for that.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
All right. Did we do the whole round?
Yeah.
Sweet.